I'm Kirsty Allen, a legal director in the Personal Injury and Clinical Negligence team here at Kingsley Napley. And today I'm very pleased to be speaking to Harry Lambert, a barrister from Outer Temple Chambers who specialises in personal injury, clinical negligence, product liability and human rights law. Harry also sits as the coroner in Inner North London. Harry is particularly passionate about emerging technologies and their interplay with the law. He is the founder of the Centre for Neurotechnology and Law, a research and advocacy centre exploring the intersection of neuroscience and legal standards. Harry's written extensively explaining why lawyers need to understand how the world is changing in this area and how many seemingly radical technologies are already available or evolving, including those which can hack into the brain to obtain private information. Today, Harry and I are going to be discussing the changing landscape of neurotechnology and the current as well as potential impacts for personal injury and clinical negligence claims, as well as generally. So Harry, it's really good to have you here. Can you explain to me a bit about what neurotechnology is?
Absolutely. So starting with the definition, it does exactly what it says on the tin. So it's neuro is of or relating to the neurological system, and then tech is technology. So, and the key thing is the interaction between them. So this is technology that can read or write directly to the neurological system. So if I write a text message, or, for example, in a sense that's interacting with my neurological system because it's my brain communicating to my thumb, communicating to the mobile phone. But there's obviously an intermediary in between.
The mobile phone.
Exactly. And so it's not direct. So this is technology which can interact a bit in a direct way.
Okay.
Probably the piece of neurotechnology that many of your listeners will be familiar with is the cochlear implant.
Yeah.
So that's it works by bypassing the damaged parts of the ear and directly stimulating the auditory nerves to provide a sense of sound to the hearing impaired. So and that's a structure which we'll keep coming back to again and again, this idea of bypassing, but we'll save that for later.
Okay. Are there any other examples that you can give, perhaps around reading or writing?
So I think a helpful way of thinking about neurotechnology, I suppose, is how invasive it is. So at one end of the extreme, you've got you can go onto Amazon and for 200 quid or so, you can buy an EEG sensor, which will tell you if you're meditating properly or how relaxed you are, that kind of thing, if you're that way inclined. And that's no more invasive than a pair of headphones. At the other end of the extreme, you've got Elon Musk, who wants to put a chip into your brain. And then you've got various shades of grey in between. So there's something called an ECOG. I'm not going to try and pronounce the actual medical term, but ECOG, which sits on the surface of the brain, i.e. it's under the skull,
Okay.
under the cranium, but above the brain. So it's a sort of halfway house. And they both have pros and cons. The pros and cons are often expressed in terms of spatial and temporal resolution.
Mm-hmm.
So spatial resolution is the smallest feature, the smallest measurement which you're capable of detecting. So, for example, I can tell that this EEG wave is coming from this part of the brain. Well, that's quite basic, that's quite crude. I can tell that it's coming from this particular neuron or these particular series of neurons. Obviously, that's very precise. And likewise, temporal resolution, how quickly can you detect a change? Once I start feeling something, how quickly will the tech pick up on it? So I think that distinction is a helpful way of looking at it. And I think the other helpful way of looking at it, to sort of try and conceptualize it, is reading and writing. So you've got technology which is can read what's going on in the brain, but not actually affect what's going on in the brain.
Okay.
So it's not trying to change it; it's just trying to work out.
It's literally reading the brain.
Yeah. Exactly. And whether you call it mind reading, I don't know. We'll come back to that in a moment. But so for example of reading, you've got EEG devices which can detect your brain waves. They can detect if you're feeling tired. They can detect if you're feeling if you're listening, so I could perhaps
we check that I'm listening to you now.
Exactly. Next time. And I should say that I think that should be absolutely compulsory in all county courts and magistrates' courts in particular, probably High Court as well, to check whether people are listening. And in fact, in China they've done that. They've trialled it on some students, and there's a sort of green light if you're concentrating and a red light if you're not. It's pretty scary. So anyway, that's an example of reading, and that actually is already in use around the world. So it's very common in long haul drivers and long distance drivers, train drivers in China, but other countries as well. There's over 5,000 companies that are using this. The mining industry is another one.
Okay, and they're using it to promote the highest levels of safety in the workplace. And
in fact, in that context, it's fairly unobjectionable, right? Because do you want someone driving your train who was out getting drunk last night and is absolutely knackered? No, probably not. So it's that I think is a fairly sort of benign example of the technology. But as I say, is a good example of reading. Now, reading sounds quite passive, but I'm now going to scare you, if that's okay.
Carry on. Yeah.
So what they've, in fact, I was going to say the latest research is actually 2023. So what some researchers established is that if you take two data sets and you use AI and you train an AI program. So let's say you say, this is Kirsty looking at a picture of a coffee cup. Mm-hmm. This is Kirsty looking at a picture of a glass. This is Kirsty looking at a laptop. And each time we do that, we scan your brain and we see how the blood is moving around in your brain. And we do that sort of 20 trillion times, or however many times it takes AI to learn things, but it starts to draw inferences between the two. Then you say to the AI program, right, I'm now going to cover up the image of the coffee cup. I'm not going to show you what Kirsty's looking at, but just from reading Kirsty's brain, what is she looking at? And the answer is, it can recreate it with a scary degree of accuracy. The other sort of way of thinking about neurotechnology is neurotechnology that writes to the brain. So this is technology that is trying to change what's going on. So a good example of that is there's a company called Neuropace, and they fit a sort of an EEG sensor to the skull. It will detect the neural precursors of an epileptic fit, and the same principles work for other conditions as well. But it will detect those neural precursors and actually try and interrupt them and try and sort of zap them so that they don't
to prevent the epileptic fit occurring.
And it works. And the other context in which that works is depression. There's cases. It's somewhat anecdotal at the moment, but there are cases where people have described not being cured by anything that modern scientists have thrown at them. So SSRIs, therapy,
trying everything
doesn't work. They put on a headset which works on the same basis. It will sort of just detect the problematic thought, and they're cured overnight.
Okay, so the thought pattern that is contributing to the depression is interrupted, alleviating symptoms.
Exactly, and you can imagine that working in OCD or ADHD or PTSD, all sorts of things. And I think it's also recommended in NICE. There's one piece of neurotech which is recommended in NICE. We'll probably come back to that a bit later. So it's one area where actually it's moving maybe a bit quicker than in others in terms of its adoption in the NHS.
Okay. It's all really interesting, and the kind of theory of it starting with something that's safety-based, so the example of the long-distance train drivers or mine workers, or preventing an epileptic fit. Like, where does that take us? Yeah. So can you explain a bit more about why we should care about this as humans as a starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, it's just I find it very philosophically interesting, because for all of human history up until now, we haven't been able to read people's thoughts, and all of our social structures are built on that premise, and that's about to change. So I think that's extremely interesting. I think that raises, before we even get to law, and I know we're going to cut, obviously, hopefully, I think that's why I'm here to talk about law. But before we get there, in terms of the ethics of that, a lot of this is AI powered, and so we are about to let big tech into our brains. we're about to let Mark Zuckerberg, into our brain. And is that something that we want to do in circumstances where there's still a lot that we don't understand about AI? I mean, before we started this recording, we were chatting about alignment faking. And that's just one example of something that I think, has potentially huge ramifications when you're going to just put AI in someone's brain.
Well, let's move on to lawyers and why it's important for lawyers. So obviously, we both specialise in personal injury and clinical negligence law. Our aim is to make sure people are compensated fairly, that they've got the right access to the right care and the right technology and everything else to live their lives in the best possible way. And we, Kingsley Napley's been at the cutting edge of that for a long time. Why do you think we need to be aware of it, and how can we practically apply that in our cases?
So I think it has very wide implications for almost every single area of law.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim, but I'll try and back it up. What we've discussed, it should be self-evident, the implications for privacy law and human rights. So that's one area which is hugely impacted. Let's take criminal law. I know it's not what we're here to discuss, but again, just another example. So this is past tense, this is not some future dystopia. Police in Dubai have used neurotechnology to scan the brains of criminal suspects, and to solve an unsolved murder.
Wow.
So, and the idea is that they're using something called an evoked response potential. So when, which sounds very complicated, but it's not actually. So evoked response potential means when I'm looking at something new that I haven't seen ever before, my brain will react differently to whether I'm recognizing something. And I can't fake that. I can't fake recognition or pretend that I don't recognize it. So I can have a poker face, I can't have a poker brain. And so in the criminal example, if you show somebody the murder weapon that they claim to have never seen, or you show someone the inside of the victim's house, which they claim never to have seen, and it flashes up as recognition, then you're onto something. And so as I say, that has been used past tense in Dubai. It's also been used in some states in America as well. So huge implications for criminal law. The other obvious one is employment law. I think during COVID we saw a rise in workplace surveillance and workplace monitoring. We've already discussed how long haul drivers are subjected to surveillance, and that seems a sort of relatively unobjectionable use of it. But how long before that creeps into the white collar areas? How long before the imperative for safety, which is currently the only justification using it, sort of slips a little bit, and actually we're talking about maybe the imperative for productivity, or so how long before that slips over time, I don't know. But just an amusing anecdote. There's a chap in Australia called Professor Alan McKay. I think I've just promoted him, actually, Dr. Alan McKay, who's pretty much the leading figure in all this. And he has suggested that, I think tongue-in-cheek, you can get him on the show, actually, that instead of having billable units of time, we as lawyers should have billable units of concentration. Now, for anyone who spends as much time on the BBC football website as I do, that will,
not my guilty pleasure.
Yeah, that will strike fear into your heart. But no, he's coming to the UK and I can give him your contact details if you like, and you can punch him in the face yourself for suggesting that there should be billable units of concentration. But so I think workplace monitoring and surveillance, I think is the next. It's the next big issue that's going to face employment law. And I think that there's some interesting parallels with, the COVID vaccine. That was a series of cases where people said, I don't want to have the vaccine. Forcing me to have it as a condition of my employment is interfering with my Article 8 rights. And the way that the courts grapple with that, probably haven't got time to deal with that today, but was quite interesting. And I can see parallels there.
Yeah. Or even with the safety imperative, which, like you say, there's kind of the greater good of the trains being driven safely versus has that driver just had a baby? Have they been upward?
Exactly.
The kind of interaction with that protected characteristic
Absolutely.
of becoming a parent versus the safety of many thousands of people.
Absolutely.
It's quite a difficult one to grapple with.
It's really tough because, as you say, it's. I mean, we've both got young children, haven't we? So it's probably for the best that we don't drive trains from Beijing to Shanghai.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of people in China who are very grateful that we don't. But as you say, it's tricky because how do you disentangle? Let's say we go out for a drink. How do you disentangle the tiredness from a protected characteristic? Having the young baby or being female or whatever it is, or being pregnant or whatever, from, well, actually I just decided to have a few drinks.
Yeah.
That disentangling it seems very, very problematic.
Yeah, really problematic. So Harry, I'm really interested to understand a bit more about how and why we should care about this emerging technology. Yeah,
so we've covered the kind of philosophical interest, if you like. Let's go to the other extreme, the money talks. So Morgan Stanley did a report recently estimating that the future market will be $400 billion in I think 10 years or so, which is obviously a vast amount of money. That, incidentally, was just the health tech component, so it's not the consumer wearables component, which is arguably bigger still.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of money to be made. There's huge opportunity. So that's one reason to care. It's also the way the world is going, whether we like it or not. So I think big tech sees this as the future. So, for example, Meta have invested very heavily in this. I think they see it as the way that the metaverse finally kicks off. Because at the moment, the metaverse, there's a slight sort of juxtaposition in a way between being in a metaverse but controlling it with a clunky joystick or something. So the idea that you control it with your brain makes much more intuitive sense, and I think that's what they're sort of banking on and tapping into. They put a lot of money into EMG, which is measuring the electrical signals in your muscles. And a few years ago, they bought Control Alt Labs, which are one of the leading neurotech labs. So I think it's the way that the world is going, and I think there's a lot of money to be made. If you'll permit a slight rant, I think.
Please carry on.
Yeah, there's also a kind of stepping back sociologically, if you like, because increasingly I'm interested in new technology and how we just see the same patterns. Whether it's PFOS or social media or whatever it is, there are these. We rush to put something on the market and we only find out about the externalities later, and we claim that it was unforeseeable. So I think we need to be careful with neurotechnology for that reason. I mean, I think it's not too late because it's not yet entangled into our day-to-day life in the same way that, for example, social media is. It's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle for social media, but neurotechnology isn't there. Even the Apple patent is not actually in the Apple phone yet.
So this is the patent for the latest version of AirPods.
Yes, that's right.
Which reads brain signals.
Which has EEG sensors in it.
Yeah.
Which is quite a crude level of neurotechnology, but actually it's all very context specific. So Nita Farahani, who is again one of the leading figures on this, gives a great example in her book, which by the way is brilliant if anyone wants to get into this. It's called The Battle for Your Brain. Absolutely brilliant book. And she gives the example of, you go to your friend's house and she says, what do you think about my new boyfriend? Or what do you think about my new sofa? And you're thinking, he's an absolute so-and-so, or what a horrible shade of mustard. And, the EEG sensor, although it's quite crude, it will know that you're lying. That's something as simple as like, I'm anxious because I'm lying, or I'm comfortable because I'm telling the truth, it will know. So, and once you start to triangulate various bits of data, so your smartwatch, you triangulate that with the data in your headphones, with your sat nav, with your phone, all of that goes together. It's a powerful picture that can be created about you. But sorry, so I was going to go back to social media if I may, and just draw that parallel. So Langdon Winner, who's one of the thinkers in this space, talks about not wanting to head into a sort of technological somnambulism. I think there's a word he uses. So it's like the idea of like sleepwalking into an apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And I do think, as I said, that we need to be careful with neurotechnology because the stakes are very high. I mean, they were high in social media, but actually I can see how they would have looked low. On the face of it, social media started with, I'm posting a picture of a cat, do you like it?
Yeah.
And so I can see how the stakes appeared low when that first came out. But with neurotechnology, we're talking about technology that's interacting with or even inside our brains. So the stakes are very high. And I think there's a great quote from a philosopher called E.O. Wilson, which is the fundamental problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, which I think is a great quote.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and he said, and you can't have the power of God without having the wisdom, love, and prudence of God. I think that's such a brilliant quote because it sums up really, in a way, what the problem is here. This is godlike technology. You can make someone who's blind see again.
Yeah.
And that is biblical.
Yeah.
That's something that is godlike. You can make people who can't hear again. So it is godlike. But what I would venture to suggest is that we don't quite live in a society which has the wisdom of gods.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave the example of social media. And, social media is an example. Climate change is another one. So there's no one in the world for whom climate change is a strategic objective. Right? No one wants climate change. In fact, we all die if climate change happens. And yet no one company can stop it, because as soon as one company says, well, actually, we're going to price oil properly, taking into account what it costs to repair the earth and put it back in, another company won't do that and will just take their market share. Mm-hmm. It's the same with social media. We could have our algorithms upregulate for something more, for something healthier. Mm-hmm. But if we do that, we'll lose market share. And of course, the other, company X is thinking that about company Y is thinking about that about company X. So you end up in this situation which nobody actually wants. Nobody wants climate change. Nobody wants teenage girls to have body dysmorphia.
No.
But nobody can stop it.
But as to how do we get our institutions to become godlike? Because changing emotions is obviously bringing them from Paleolithic to godlike. It's going to be difficult. But how can our institutions, from reading some of your papers, our institutions, particularly around issues like product liability, are just so far behind the curve of what's emerging.
They absolutely are. I mean, I think there are a few examples of humanity sort of coming together and dealing with an international problem in an international way. I think what one example would be the atomic bomb and nuclear war. And actually, this was a threat which people were saying that humanity's not going to survive any more than a couple of years with America and Russia fighting it out. And actually, we came together and there were sort of guiding principles were agreed upon. And I guess it's going to have to be something like that. But I think unless we do something like that, I think there will be catastrophic fallout from it. But unfortunately, as I say, the society we live in is what Daniel Schmachtenberger calls game theoretic. It's this. Company X can't do it because company Y might take my share. Company Y is thinking the same thing. It's game theory. That's the world we live in. And so we end up with what he calls a multipolar trap. As I say, no one wants it, but everyone's heading towards it. So, sorry, that's again a kind of long-winded answer to your question as to why we should care. Because to bring it back to neurotech, the point being that I think unless we have this kind of stock check of possible externalities and have this conversation now, before it's embedded in our society, the better chance we've got of it not going disastrously wrong.
Yeah, and it being a positive thing. You were talking about some of it being able to predict people suffering from neurodegenerative change. So actually, if we have a societal conversation about what society wants to do for those people, like how does it want to look after them? How does it want to empower them to live as well, as long as possible? Then that's much more effective than finding ourselves in a situation where an insurance company is saying, no, we're not insuring you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that there is an enormous amount of good that can be done here. I mean, again, it's the same with social media, actually. I think there's this idea that, that technology is neutral and that it doesn't have any values. And I think we need to get rid of that idea. I think there are embedded hidden values in technology. That's something that I've written on if people want to look into that. But what I mean by that is that if you had a piece of neurotechnology that we talked about PTSD or OCD, and it's zapping these problematic thoughts to interrupt them, you're having to have a value judgment on what is a problematic thought, or what's a normal obsessive thought to have, and what's a OCD, obsessive thought, to have. So we've got these, there are hidden embedded values. So, and sorry, why I say that's similar to social media is that it's, the tech itself, can be used for good or bad in a way. Like the algorithms. So in Taiwan, I think the social media has been used in an extremely progressive way, and you can use it to upregulate for surprising things that the far left and the far right both agree on. And it will find those things and it will upregulate for those. And that's very good at bringing people together and making them see eye to eye, and doing the opposite of what the rest of social media does, which is create this divisive world.
Yeah, so, polar echo chamber.
Absolutely, yeah. So the problem is not the the algorithms per se. The problem is not social media per se. It's the algorithms that people choose. And in like manner, as you say, there's a huge amount of good. The problem is not neurotech. It's how we choose to deploy it and what we're willing to say we're prepared to accept and what we're not prepared to accept.
Yeah. So as we were just discussing, neurotechnology is a worldwide emerging technology. Can you explain a bit how other countries are dealing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you won't be surprised to know that we're lagging behind, as we often are. So the countries that have kind of dealt with it head on are largely in Latin America. So we've got Mexico, Brazil, Costa Rica, Chile, Uruguay, Argentina, which sounds a bit like the quarterfinal draw for the Copa America. But that's a list of countries that have dealt with it head on in a legislative way, and have actually enshrined neuro rights as part of their constitution. That's also happened in some states in America, so Colorado, Minnesota, California, for example. So that's it on the legislative side. On the case law side, there's really only one that I can think of. But
tell me about it. I'm interested.
Yeah, so this was in Chile. So Chile are at the forefront of this. And there's a case called Girardi and Emotive. So Emotive is a Silicon Valley-based company who makes neurotech, and they make a headset which I suppose is best described as a Fitbit for your brain. So it sort of tells you, how whether you're relaxed enough and in real time. So I mean, it's just as a kind of amusing aside, just as you have people, in the lift sort of saying, I've just run 12K, look at my smartwatch, I ran 12K, I did it in this many minutes. We're already starting to see people post their sort of brain imagery online saying, look how relaxed I am. Look how relaxed my brain waves are. So you've got this sort of competitive Buddhism, which I think is just, it's hilarious. But anyway, so he set up his device and he didn't upgrade to a pro account, which meant that he was unable to import or export any of his brain data. So what that means is it goes onto Emotive's server. He has no access to it. He has no power to delete it, and it rests there. And so he brought a claim in the Chilean, which went to the Chilean Supreme Court, saying that the fact that I have no access and no power to delete my data is a violation of the new constitution of Chile. And unsurprisingly, given that the piece of legislation was brought in directly to enforce neuro rights, he succeeded. And actually, interestingly, the legislation really had teeth. So there was effectively a kind of Chilean equivalent of injunctive relief, and Emotive were not allowed to sell the product in Chilean territory. And I think they're in discussions now about how to modify it to make it compatible with the Constitution of Chile. So it really did bite. It wasn't just something that was sort of ethereal.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And again, the Latin Americans are really at the heart of this. I maybe later we'll talk about the Centre for Neurotechnology Law, which is a not-for-profit that I set up, and quite a few people who were key players in that litigation. So Jose Munoz and another chap whose name escapes me actually. I can picture his face. Funny enough, I went for a drink around here with him. Carlos Amuntegue Pereiro, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that very badly, are members of the centre. And if you did want to do another podcast, dealing with that case, because I think it's a really interesting case, I'm sure I could put them in touch, and they'd be really good people to have.
So tell me a bit more about the centre.
So it's a not-for-profit organisation. A couple of years ago, I was getting very into this, and was reading more, listening more, and the more I did so, the two things struck me. One was that these were issues which sort of faithfully mapped out the contours of my own practice. So the big issues were privacy, product liability, human rights, medical and clinical negligence. All of those were basically what I do. So I've got a slightly unusual practice. I do product liability and clinical negligence is my kind of meat and drink, PI. But I also did a little bit of privacy, which I sort of carried with me. So it felt as though it was like, oh well, if it's not going to be me, then who?
Yeah.
And secondly, just the sense I was very struck by how no one's really talking about this or doing anything about it over here. There's a little bit of work in America. So Nita Farahani, who's brilliant, and she's a big fan of the centre as well. She's been very good to us. And Alan McKay in Australia, who's our president. And so they're doing a lot of work, but it tends to be slightly more academic, and it also tends to be very focused on privacy, on human rights, and to a certain extent these days on employment.
Okay.
But there's next to nothing, as far as I can tell, A, in the UK, and B, certainly on PI and Clin-Neg. As far as I can see, I'm the only person banging on about this in the world on PI and Clin-Neg, which is weird because I shouldn't be.
No.
I've got no qualifications. I'm just a often just put the kids to bed. I'm in my pajamas, just in an attic. Think, well, it should be me. But it's so I think it's important that the baton is handed over to others, and it's it becomes part of a conversation and dialogue over here, because we are lagging behind.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think certainly some of the experts that we've worked with for a very long time have introduced kind of technology through the claims that you and I both specialise in that are now becoming more mainstream.
Yeah.
But it's the people in receipt of the damages awards that have the funds that enable them to access the kind of cutting edge technologies.
Right.
And then it filters down.
Yeah.
Certainly you see that particularly in wheelchair technology, for example. You have somebody that's, seeing the wheelchair service on the NHS and is being given a very basic chair that's not usable for them or their family or well fitted to them. And yet as soon as you're in receipt of an interim payment, their wheelchair is completely transformed, their independence, their mobility, their access to things is completely and utterly transformed.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things I feel really passionate about, is what we can achieve through what we get our clients.
Yeah.
And neurotech just feels like it's the next frontier of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great example. And I was going to say something similar about prosthetics, because I think prosthetics is something where bizarrely lawyers do seem to know a lot about prosthetics. If you go to your average sort of amputation or catastrophic PI lawyer, they'll know everything about the latest Dorset Orthopaedics this, and and you go to conferences and Dorset Orthopaedics shows you the latest stuff. And it's weird because that's just that in a sense smart prosthesis is increasingly that will be neurotechnology as well. But that's a great example of something where we do know about it, and we do know about it for exactly the reason you just given. Yeah. That it can transform our clients' lives. Yeah. I always remember one of my most treasured memories as a barrister is just meeting someone who, in the first time I met her, she was in a really bad state, stick, could barely walk, just really not in a great way. Liability disputed, and then I think 5 years later, I remember when we got a settlement literally at the door of court. I mean, I was about to start my opening speech. That was how close we were, and she had this new prosthesis. We went to the pub and sort of celebrated the settlement, and it was just it was so radically different. Yeah. And it was a really beautiful moment. I think the more moments like that we can create better.
100%, because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about people being able to live their lives as they want to live them. But I think if we're not learning about this new frontier, then we're doing a disservice. But it's how we get that into our claims that I am kind of struggling to join the dots up with.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think as we touched on earlier, I think in a way it's a new expert discipline. Yeah. And I suppose prosthetics again is a useful analogy. That there's no one. Yes, you have prosthetists obviously, but that there's no one discipline which feeds into amputation. You have a whole range of them.
Yeah.
And I suppose that might be the way to go. And we may end up with a subspecialism of neuroprosthetics, for example. In fact, I think we will. And certainly, I know people who are training now in neurology, who are working now in neurology, and that's what they want to go into. So again, it's what they want to become a consultant in doesn't actually exist yet.
No.
So I think it will happen actually.
Yeah.
But it takes time, and it takes the right. If only there were a forward-thinking claimant set of solicitors who could, who could take this forward. But no, it's up to people like us to run these cases.
Yeah, it is.
And to bring the right challenges, and as well as getting it into the culture of the kind of day-to-day.
Yeah. Is there a particular piece of equipment that you think will make a good kind of test to begin to introduce this concept?
Yeah,
to courts, defendants, everybody.
There's one in particular which really blew my mind. We've got a video of it if you want to.
Oh wow! Yeah. Okay.
I can show, because as much as I can describe it, it's probably better to just look at it. And I think we're going to do this in a very clever way that means that everybody watching can also see the video. So it needs no introduction. I'll just play it.
When I turn up, you get going. At every stop, baby, oh, it's showing. If I should stay, you find a reason to leave. When I'm busy, that's the time you are free. Just tell me, what should I do? How can I get through? Oh, how can I get through? How can I get through? Tell me, baby, please.
Cleaning started.
How can I get through to you?
That was amazing in terms of understanding what somebody can control using the technology. Do you think it's going to help us understand people who suffered a really traumatic brain injury that maybe can't communicate in the way that they used to be able to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to fundamentally change all of that. I mean, we saw in that video that his wife's texting him saying, I'll be home in an hour. Is that okay? And he writes back with his mind, yes, that's fine. See you in an hour. So all of that, I think, is going to be completely transformed. And if you imagine how isolating it must be not to be able to communicate with the outside world at all, not to be able to say, can you scratch this because it's itchy, or just I'm feeling rubbish today, or can I have a cuddle or whatever. It's completely transformative.
So I'm really interested at what stage you think we can start including these costs for this technology in our schedules of loss. Are we going to be looking to do it after one set of trials has concluded, two sets of trials has concluded? When are we going to be at the point that an expert's going to be confident to argue for it, a judge is going to award it, and a defendant is going to accept it and pay for it?
So short answer, about 5 years.
Okay.
Slightly longer answer, I'm working on it. So I'm going to Canada this month, and I'm speaking to several people who are at Synchron and who are kind of working in this space. And I'm on at them quite hard as to kind of when are we going to have it on the market? How much is it going to cost? And asking all those questions. You'll be the first to know as soon as I get those answers. But I think that the difficulty at the moment in terms of, because it's obviously something I've thought a lot about, and in terms of like putting it in a schedule of loss or something. I think the difficulty at the moment is that we don't really know whether it's going to be more advantageous for claimants or defendants. So there are lots of unanswered questions. So, for example, we've just seen the bit of kit that Rodney has, where he's controlling a fan and some music with his brain, and it's awesome. Does he need a carer there, or does he not? Because obviously, if something goes wrong, it's going to be pretty bad if there's nobody there, and you ring up and say, "Oh, well, I'll be there in an hour." That's a sort of nightmare scenario.
Yeah, scary, unsafe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if Rodney needs to go to the toilet, then the machine's not going to be able to do that. So there are certain things it can't do, and there may be elements of the levels of risk that we're not prepared to accept. Now, if it's actually saying, if it's a case of it's there as well as the carers, I still think the claimant should recover that personally. I think it's a case of restitutio in integrum, and if it costs £900,000, well, that's tough on the defendant. You shouldn't have injured this person. And I think that is absolutely about restitutio in integrum. I feel very strongly about
somebody being put back in the position that they would have been in had the accident not happened. And so allowing them independent choice of what music they listen to, what fan they put on, without having to ask somebody else to do it for them.
Exactly, and that's it's at the heart of human dignity. And I've had this dog my whole life. I want to feed my dog. I don't want to get a carer to come in and feed the dog. So it's absolutely the heart of all that. But as I say, so if it's as well as carers, I think it's going to be sort of very expensive. You could see the argument from defendants, though, which is that we'll actually have it instead of carers.
Yeah.
You don't need a carer there. Why do you need a carer if you can just switch on the fan, audio shopping on Amazon, text your wife, et cetera, et cetera. In which case it might backfire for claimants, and you'd be left with someone saying, well, here's $500,000 to go and buy the piece of kit, but we're not paying for any care. So I think it's, it could go both ways.
But I still think that people would choose the technology over a carer.
Oh, they would, yeah.
Claimants just want to live as independently and as fully as they possibly can.
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. And so we'll see. I think there are all these sorts of unanswered questions which need to kind of play out before we know, whether we should be pleading it and sort of on behalf of whom
and how.
And how.
It'll be really interesting to see which experts kind of emerge as the kind of cutting edge, aware of this technology, fully supportive of it experts. That's also, I suppose, my job is to start figuring out who those experts are going to be and using them.
That's right. And it's not always who you expect. I mean, Neuralink have been in, a lot of the news recently because every time Elon Musk tweets, there's headline news. But actually, the major players are arguably some of the, I daren't say smaller companies because they're obviously massive companies, but they're small compared to Elon Musk. The likes of Synchron, who are Australian but now moved to the US. They're making real strides and real progress. And the bit of kit that we just saw was Synchron. And BlackRock, Neurotech as well. I'm not going to hesitate to call them small because they're
obviously
one
massive,
of the largest companies in the world. But BlackRock are making great progress as well. So I think we're going to see a lot of people coming into this space, and there's going to be a huge influx into the market. I think there's all sorts of regulatory issues as well, which I know a little bit about, but I wouldn't sort of say I'm an expert with a capital E on.
No.
But which is going to be very interesting as well.
Yeah, no, it will be, because it's really exciting technology. But how do you regulate that sphere, especially when they're internationally based companies?
Yeah, and I think that there's all sorts of dilemmas. So, a lot of the things that that I'm hearing sort of at the coalface from people who are wanting to, make the UK a centre of excellence on this, is that they will go to a patient and say, look, would you like to test out this new bit of kit? And there's a huge risk that things could go horribly wrong. But actually, if it works, it means, you can communicate with your family again, you can move your limbs again, whatever it is. And they want the patient is saying, yes, sign me up, because A, I don't care, I've got nothing to lose now. I want to do this, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And B, at least I'll be contributing to science. And actually, the regulatory framework that we've got in the UK doesn't deal with that situation terribly well. And essentially, if there's a chance that it can go horrifically wrong, you're not allowed to do it. So it's not. I don't know enough about it to say that it's stifling innovation, but that's anecdotally what I'm hearing. And I think that again, what I'm hearing is that it's that the MHRA is kind of feared by a lot of these companies that are coming to the market, and it's seen as this sort of unruly god that they're not quite sure how to appease, and they're not quite sure how to structure the tests, and they're not quite whereas I think in America it's a lot easier to just sit down with the FDA and say, look, we're thinking of launching this, can we have a meeting to discuss it, tell us which hoops we need to jump through, and away you go. And I think and they also, I think we're trying to copy that model, by the way, so I think that might be coming, but I think up until now there has been a bit of a brain drain. And I think they also have, in America, they have something called the I think it's like breakthrough designation, where you can say this is so next level that we want special dispensation from the normal rules. And so Elon Musk's chip that allows you to see again, it got breakthrough designation. That was last year. Okay. So that sort of fast forwards things. And I know again, I've met people at Neurolink and stuff who were actively looking for somewhere to come. They want a English-speaking country. There's various things in the population that they're looking for, which we ticked, which boxes we tick. But they chose Canada, and I suspect it was, I don't know, but I suspect it was because of that regulatory regime. The regulation.
Yeah. It's hard because the regulation is obviously designed to protect us all, and we were talking earlier about privacy and needing to protect that. But then at the same time, there's no claimant that I've ever met that would sit there and say, no, I'm not, I don't want to participate in something that might vastly improve my quality of life.
Exactly. And it's really difficult because, neurotechnology covers such a wide spectrum of things. Yeah. And I can see that you might want different regulation for something that, could go catastrophically wrong, but if it works, it will allow you to walk for the first time in 50 years. Vis-a-vis some bit of neurotechnology which is being used, for the competitive Buddhism. So although it's one word, it covers a huge amount of stuff. I mean, the obvious dividing line is medical and non-medical, but there are other dividing lines as well.
But even that line is crossed, even the people that wear Apple Watches. Yeah. My Apple Watch will tell me if it thinks my heart's not working properly. Yeah. But I didn't buy it for that. I bought it.
And that's a great example.
Everything's merging anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's a brilliant example because the EEG headset that we talked about earlier, on the airpod, that will be able to detect the precursors of degenerative conditions. Okay. So and it's not designed to do that, but it just can do it. Yeah. And so again, that raises all sorts of questions. I mean, Apple's going to know that, and you're not. Yeah. So do you want to know it? And under what circumstances will you be told it? And it's there's all sorts of fascinating questions. I don't profess to have the answers because
it's emerging, it's changing,
but it's fascinating stuff. Definitely.
Yeah, it really is. Harry, thank you so much. It's really, really informative conversation and really helpful in terms of thinking about cases that, our cases will be cases that we're starting now will be concluding in 5 years' time. Really helpful to have at least a beginnings of a kind of conversation and a thought process about what that might evolve into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're probably not very good as lawyers at doing that. I'd say there tends to be a kind of excessively binary approach of saying, I'm drafting my schedule of loss, this bit of kit exists or it doesn't exist. If it exists, I'll claim it. If it doesn't exist, I won't claim it. And we're not used to this situation, which is actually there's something which is 5 years away, which is totally transformative. What do we do? And obviously the person who gets injured in 5 years' time should be in the same position as our client now. in 5 years' time.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be treating those two people any differently, especially in the case of young claimants. So it is difficult, and I think that the curves have never been so exponential.
No.
Really, really exponential. So it's to look at it in a positive way. It's fascinating how to be alive. Really. I think we're going to, with AI and neurotech and all these things, it's we're about to live something through a very interesting historical period.
And we've talked almost exclusively about quantum, so about how somebody's life can be improved and how we fund these within the claim, but are there implications for liability as well? That's
true. So I think, in my kind of thought on this, I've focused on quantum, but I think there are liability issues. Two that spring to mind are, there's a company called SuitX who is working with IKEA and other sort of distributors, and they have these sort of exoskeletons which are designed to support people who are carrying large weights. They support the lumbar area, so that's a liability issue in the sense that at some point that is going to become the sort of industry norm. It's not now, but now it's a sort of forward-thinking progressive employer like IKEA who's doing that. But at some point you're going to say, well, hang on, why am I getting these terrible back injuries? If I have to work for IKEA, I wouldn't be getting them. So it's a liability issue in that sense, and of course in terms of rehabilitating people back into the workplace.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think we will also see, in the context of workplace stress, I think that's another area where liabilities, the sort of ground rules are going to change slightly, because most of the case law on that is about foreseeability, about what did the employer know. Well, it's going to be pretty hard to say you didn't know when you've been monitoring someone and you can see how stressed they are by looking at their brainwaves. So I think that's again another good example of how there are implications for liability as well. But this is all sort of novel territory, really.
Yeah, very.
And I'd encourage people to kind of come forward, email me, speak to me, because I think it's the more people talking about this, the better. And I think it's so new that there are almost certainly lots of implications that I haven't thought of.
No. And product liability is something you thought of. I've read about it in your papers. And what I find really interesting is you refer back to the kind of kettles and toasters, and about how lots of our product liability legislation is drafted, or guidance is drafted around something like that. It's very tangible. They've existed in homes for decades.
Yeah.
But this is it's hard to write the kind of product liability legislation of something that's emerging and changing so much.
Yeah, and to be fair to them, they were drafting it in 1985.
Yeah.
When AI and neurotech was probably not on at the forefront of their mind. But as you say, it's very good at that situation. It's very good at, I've got a toaster, it's exploded.
Yeah.
Toasters shouldn't explode. It's very adept at dealing with that. It's less adept at dealing with AI and neurotech for a whole host of reasons. I mean, one of them is that the assessment of liability under UK law is that it's the point at which it is released onto the market and the point that it's put into circulation. And of course now actually a lot of technology changes quite a lot after it's been put into circulation. You have software updates and things like that. And you have there's a sort of more iterative process. And the current legislation can't do that at all.
No.
I'm not even sure how it would go about trying to assess that. There's also implications in terms of machine learning. Again, you could reduce that you produce a product, you put it on the market. Perhaps it's a market leader when it's produced onto the market, but then over time, as other companies catch up, it becomes the worst in class. And so you've got a sort of evolving standards and an evolving standard of care. Again, not sure how to deal with that. So there's all sorts of issues where I think it's unclear how the law would grapple with it. And limitations, another good example. We've got a 10-year long stop, and a lot of this technology is sort of slow and insidious, and again, it's not a kettle exploding when it's exploded the minute after it's exploded. It's a sort of more slower burning process.
Yeah, damage has been done and when and how. It's kind of going to be more interesting to track, difficult to track.
Absolutely. So I think there's all sorts of issues in that space. I mean, in Europe, they have amended the Product Liability Directive. So they in 2024 they updated it. So they now do deal with these software update issue and a few other issues as well. But of course, post-Brexit, we're stuck in 1985
Okay.
For the foreseeable future, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of product liability issues out there, and in a way, we sort of almost need a whole
separate
podcast just for that.
And we're out of time. It's been so good to hear all about this and to think about it in respect of the opportunities it's going to offer the people I represent and the people I care about so much, but also in terms of how practically we might begin building that in. So in cases that we're taking on in the next few years that will be settling in a new era where these things are available to them.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.